The rich boss threw the orphan boy out to a ruined mill, but the wheel kept a secret. On the porch of the Crawford Ranch house in West Texas, 14-year-old Billy Sawyer, his patched-up clothes hanging on his thin frame and his eyes red from sleeplessness, faced the cruel words of Mr. Crawford. His 6-year-old brother Timmy clung to his leg, while 10-month-old Gracie was a quiet weight in a worn shawl on his back. "Listen here, you worthless kid. Your father was a useless drunk who drowned in the reservoir because he was reckless, and your mother was some crazy woman who died of a broken heart because she couldn't even last a month without him. And now you, a filthy runt of 14 with a little boy and a baby who can't even walk, you come here demanding the $25,000 compensation for 20 years of work. The only thing the family of a drowned field hand deserves is that abandoned mill by the dry creek bed. Take it and disappear. If you bother me again, I'll call CPS, and by tomorrow your little siblings will wake up in separate state homes. The boy in El Paso, the baby in Amarillo, and I'll have you sent to juvenile hall until you learn your place." Before we continue Billy's heart-wrenching journey, we want to take a moment to connect with you, our viewer. We believe in transparency, so we want to share that this story was crafted with the assistance of artificial intelligence, but it was guided and refined by a human touch to convey a genuine message that we hope resonates with you. To help us build our community, could you please leave a comment telling us which city or country you're watching from? It's wonderful to see how far these stories reach. If you feel a connection to this narrative and believe in the power of resilience, please consider subscribing to our channel and giving this video a thumbs up. Your support is invaluable. Sadly, the difficult path Billy is about to walk is one that many children face when they lose their parents, left with the immense responsibility of fighting to keep their family from being torn apart. Now let's return to him. Samuel Sawyer was the bedrock of his family, a man whose loyalty to the Crawford Ranch was etched into 24 years of relentless Texas sun. His hands, calloused and strong, were a testament to a life spent toiling for a dream that was always just beyond his grasp. A small, secure home where his children could grow without fear. He wasn't the reckless drunk Mr. Crawford painted him to be. He was a devoted father who saved every spare dollar, hoping to one day repair the leaky roof over his family's head. He had placed his trust in Mr. Crawford's promises of a fair compensation after 2 decades of service, a promise that evaporated the moment he drew his last breath. For years, Samuel and other workers had warned the foreman about the unprotected reservoir, a gaping mouth of water waiting for a tragedy. Their concerns were dismissed as whining, a cost-saving measure that ultimately cost Samuel his life. Hope Sawyer was aptly named, for she was the quiet light in their small, weathered home. A woman of fragile health, her strength wasn't in her body but in her boundless love for her husband and children. When Samuel was alive, her gentle presence made their difficult life bearable, but his sudden violent death shattered her world. The grief was a physical weight, a pressure on her weak heart that no medicine could ease. Mr. Crawford's cruel dismissal of her as a crazy woman was a vile lie. She was a wife who had lost her anchor, a mother terrified for her children's future without their protector. In the 3 weeks that followed Samuel's drowning, she faded, the light in her eyes dimming until, just a week before Billy faced his tormentor, her heart simply gave out. Her passing wasn't weakness. It was the final, devastating blow of a tragedy that left her children utterly alone. Before the silence fell, the Sawyer home, though humble, was filled with the sounds of a loving family. Memories of those days were now Billy's most painful treasure. He remembered his father, Samuel, returning from the fields, exhausted and covered in dust, but his face would always break into a wide smile the moment he saw his children. He'd lift Timmy high into the air, making him squeal with laughter, and gently kiss baby Gracie's forehead. They would eat their simple meals of beans and cornbread at a worn wooden table, listening to Samuel's stories and Hope's soft humming. It was in those moments that Samuel would talk about the future, about the $25,000 he was owed, and how it would be their ticket to a life where Billy could finish school. It was a life built on love and simple promises, a world that now felt like a distant, impossible dream. Just a month ago, Billy Sawyer was still a boy. He worked alongside his father, learning to mend fences and read the sky for rain, but his evenings were still his own, filled with a boy's thoughts and a lighter heart. He felt the weight of his family's poverty, but it was a shared burden, carried on his father's broad shoulders. Now those shoulders were gone, and the entire weight had crashed down upon his own, still-forming frame. He remembered a specific evening, watching his father carefully oil a rusty tool. "This ranch doesn't own us, son," Samuel had said, his voice low and serious. "It doesn't own our name or our dignity. A man's worth isn't what he has, but what he is. Never let anyone, especially a rich man, make you feel small." Those words were now a shield, the only inheritance his father had left him. His siblings were his world, his reason to swallow his tears and clench his fists in silence. 6-year-old Timmy understood that Mommy and Daddy were in heaven, but he didn't understand the finality of it. At night he would whisper the questions that tore Billy's heart apart. "Is Daddy building us a new house in the sky? Will Mama be mad if I cry?" He tried to be brave for Billy, but his small body would tremble with silent sobs in the cold darkness. Then there was Gracie, just 10 months old, a bundle of pure, helpless need. Her cries were not for a lost parent, but for the immediate primal demands of an empty belly or the discomfort of a wet cloth. She was a constant living reminder of his overwhelming responsibility. Protecting them, keeping them from being torn apart and scattered to different cities, was no longer a choice. It was the only purpose he had left. Mr. Crawford's cruelty was not an isolated act of anger. It was the very foundation of his dusty empire. The other ranch hands knew it well. They spoke in hushed tones of his temper, of wages docked for minor infractions, and of other accidents over the years that were quickly forgotten. They had seen him look at Samuel Sawyer not as a loyal employee of 24 years, but as a piece of aging equipment that had finally broken down. The lie about Samuel being a drunk was easy for him to spin, because it fit his narrative that his workers were disposable, their lives holding no value beyond the labor they could provide. Billy had seen the fear in the other men's eyes when his father was alive, a deference born not of respect, but of the knowledge that Mr. Crawford held the power to shatter their lives on a whim. This was the man Billy was up against. The death of Samuel Sawyer was not an accident. It was an inevitability forged by Mr. Crawford's greed. For years, Samuel and other hands had spoken of the reservoir, a deep, unprotected scar on the land, warning the foreman of its dangers. Their pleas were dismissed as the grumblings of lazy workers. On that fateful afternoon, Samuel was sent to clear debris near the slippery edge, a task he was ordered to do alone. When the news came, delivered by a grim-faced foreman who couldn't meet his son's eyes, Billy's world fractured. The funeral was a blur of dust and hushed condolences from frightened workers. Mr. Crawford made a show of patting Billy's shoulder, his voice thick with false sympathy. "Your father was a good man," he lied. "Don't you worry, I'll take care of his family." The promise of the $25,000 compensation was a hollow comfort, a seed of hope planted in poisoned soil. The loss of Samuel was a blow that Hope Sawyer's fragile heart could not endure. In the 3 weeks that followed, she withered like a flower deprived of sun and water. The vibrant light in her eyes dimmed to a flicker of profound silent grief. She would sit for hours, staring at the empty doorway, her hands clutching a worn shirt of Samuel's, as if she could will him to walk through it one last time. Her death was quiet, a final gentle surrender in her sleep, but for Billy it was a thunderclap that left him in absolute silence. He was now the sole guardian of his 2 younger siblings. When Timmy asked, "Is Mama building the house in the sky with Daddy now?" Billy had to swallow the lump in his throat and nod, his own grief locked away behind a wall of responsibility. There was no time to be a child anymore, he had to be their rock. A week after they buried their mother, the reality of their situation became brutally clear. The small amount of money Samuel had saved was gone, spent on a bit of cornmeal, milk for Gracie, and the cost of 2 simple wooden coffins. The nights grew colder, and the hunger gnawing at their bellies became a constant, painful ache. Timmy stopped asking for food, his silence a heavier burden on Billy than any complaint. Gracie's cries were weak, a heartbreaking sound that spurred Billy into action. He knew he had to face Mr. Crawford. The fear was a cold knot in his stomach, the thought of confronting the powerful man making his hands tremble. But then he would look at Timmy's trusting face, and feel Gracie's small warm body against his back, and the fear was eclipsed by a fierce, protective love. He would not let them starve. He would claim what his father had earned. He dressed himself, Timmy and Gracie in their cleanest, though threadbare clothes. Holding Timmy's hand, and with Gracie secured in the shawl on his back, he walked the long, dusty road to the main ranch house. The opulence of the place was a physical blow. The sprawling porch, the manicured lawn, the sound of men laughing from within. Mr. Crawford was holding court in a large wicker chair, surrounded by his foreman and other well-dressed men. They fell silent as the three small, solemn figures approached. Billy felt their stares like pinpricks on his skin. He stood before the rancher, his back straight, his gaze steady, and tried to channel the quiet dignity his father had always possessed. He cleared his throat, his voice cracking slightly as he stated his purpose. He was there for the $25,000 compensation owed for his father's 2 decades of loyal service. A slow, cruel smile spread across Mr. Crawford's face. The rancher's words were a torrent of calculated cruelty, designed to humiliate and break him in front of the other men. "Listen here, you worthless kid," he began, his voice booming across the porch, each word a stone thrown at the memory of his parents. He painted Samuel as a reckless drunk, and Hope as a weak, crazy woman. The gathered men shifted uncomfortably, but none dared to intervene. The foreman, however, smirked in agreement. The vilest poison was in the threat that followed, a detailed, sadistic vision of his family being torn apart and scattered across Texas. Then, with a theatrical flourish, Mr. Crawford pulled a crumpled document from his shirt pocket and shoved it against Billy's chest. "The only thing the family of a drowned field hand deserves is that abandoned mill," he sneered. "Take it and disappear." It was a public execution of his family's last hope. Billy stood his ground, his face a mask of stone. He did not cry or beg. He simply took the crumpled deed, his young fingers closing around the insult. He felt Timmy trembling beside him and gave his hand a reassuring squeeze, a silent message that he was still there, that he would protect him. He adjusted the weight of Gracie on his back, turned without a word, and began the long walk away from the grand house. The foreman's derisive laughter followed them. "Think you're the man of the house now? I give him 2 weeks before he gives up those kids." Each step away from that place felt heavier than the last, not from defeat, but from the crushing weight of injustice. He looked down at Timmy's confused, frightened face and knew he couldn't explain the hatred they had just witnessed. All he could do was hold his hand tighter and walk toward the ruins they now called home. The walk to the abandoned mill felt like a funeral procession for a life that had just ended. When they arrived, the sight was a physical blow worse than any insult Mr. Crawford had hurled. The structure was a skeleton of rotting wood and crumbling stone, its great water wheel frozen in place by rust and time, half submerged in a bone-dry creek bed. The wind whistled through gaping holes in the roof, carrying the sour smell of decay and abandonment. Dust motes danced in the slivers of afternoon light that pierced the gloom. Timmy, his small hand clutching Billy's, looked up at the skeletal building with wide, frightened eyes. "Billy, is this it?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Is this where we have to live now?" Billy swallowed the knot of despair in his throat, unable to form a reply. He could only nod, the simple gesture feeling like the heaviest lie he had ever told, a betrayal of the safety he was supposed to provide. Inside, the desolation was even more profound. Billy forced a strength he didn't feel into his voice, trying to shield his siblings from the terror that was clawing at his own heart. "Look, Timmy," he said, pointing to a corner that was slightly less exposed to the elements. "We can make a good bed here. It'll be like camping, an adventure." But Timmy wasn't fooled. He started to cry, silent tears tracking paths through the grime on his cheeks. "Why did that mean man yell at you?" "I want Daddy. I want to go home." Billy pulled him into a tight embrace, Gracie still a warm, oblivious weight on his back. He held his little brother, rocking him gently, whispering promises of safety he wasn't sure he could keep. For a moment they were just 3 lost children, huddled together in the ruins of their world, the only warmth coming from their desperate, frightened embrace. The first days were a brutal lesson in survival. Their immediate enemy was thirst. The creek bed was dry as dust, forcing Billy to walk for over a mile each morning, to a stagnant cattle trough, carrying Gracie on his back and a rusty bucket that leaked half its contents by the time he returned. Food was an even greater challenge. He scoured the arid land for anything edible, finding only a few bitter berries and a single bird's nest with 2 small eggs. That evening he carefully cooked them over a tiny fire, mashing them up and dividing the meager portion between Timmy and Gracie. When Timmy asked why he wasn't eating, Billy simply smiled and rubbed his stomach. "I already ate while I was out looking," he lied, the gnawing hunger in his own belly, a secret he would carry alone. He watched them eat every last speck, their survival a victory more important than his own suffering. As the sun set, the Texas cold seeped through the broken walls of the mill, a chilling predator in the darkness. Billy worked tirelessly to create a semblance of shelter, stuffing the largest holes with clumps of dry grass and patching a section of the roof with a piece of rusted tin he found nearby. At night, they slept together on a pile of old sacks, a single threadbare blanket covering their small bodies. Billy always positioned himself on the outside, a human shield against the cold and whatever else the night might hold. He would lie awake for hours, listening to the soft breathing of his siblings, his ears tuned to every rustle of the wind or cry of a distant coyote. He only allowed himself to sleep when exhaustion finally claimed him. His last conscious thought always the same, a silent vow that he would be awake before them, ready to protect them from the coming day. The nearby community, what little of it existed, offered no comfort. The story of the orphan boy at the ruined mill spread quickly, becoming a source of cruel gossip among the other ranch hands who were too afraid of Mr. Crawford to offer help. "That Sawyer kid won't last a month," they'd mutter. "He's just as useless as his old man." Some of the town's women, seeing the 3 children on a rare trip for water, would shake their heads with a pity that felt like judgment. One older woman, her face a mask of false concern, stopped Billy on the path. "Son, you can't raise those children here," she said, her voice cloying. "The best thing for them, the most loving thing, would be to let the state take them. They'll get warm beds and 3 meals a day." The suggestion felt like a knife twisting in his gut, the idea that tearing them apart could ever be considered an act of love. The threat of separation became terrifyingly real a week later. A dusty county sheriff's car rumbled up the path to the mill, and a stern-faced deputy stepped out, a clipboard in his hand. He said he was there for a welfare check, following an anonymous tip. Billy's heart hammered against his ribs. He stood in the doorway, blocking the view inside, trying to appear older and more capable than he was. He made Timmy stay quiet in the back, and prayed Gracie wouldn't cry. The deputy's eyes scanned the dilapidated structure, his gaze lingering on Billy's patched clothes and thin frame. "Are these children being fed properly? Do you have a safe place for them to sleep?" he asked, his tone laced with suspicion. Billy lied through his teeth, his voice steady despite the terror, insisting they were fine. The deputy left with a warning. "I'll be back. If I find these kids are in danger, I won't hesitate." That night, after Timmy and Gracie had cried themselves to sleep from hunger, Billy slipped out of the mill and sat by the dry creek bed, the cold stones seeping into his bones. The dam of strength he had built for his siblings finally broke, and silent, racking sobs shook his entire body. He looked up at the star-filled sky, the vast, indifferent expanse making him feel smaller and more alone than ever. "Dad," he whispered, his voice raw with grief and desperation. "What do I do? I promised you. I promised I'd take care of them, but I'm failing. They're hungry and they're scared, and I don't know how to fix it." He buried his face in his hands, the weight of his promise feeling like an impossible burden. For a fleeting, horrifying moment he thought of the woman's words, wondering if giving them up was the only way to save them. The thought made him feel sick. The image of Timmy being loaded into one car and Gracie into another, their faces streaked with tears as they were driven in opposite directions, flashed through his mind. The horror of that vision was a physical jolt, a surge of adrenaline that burned away the despair. No, he would rather starve with them here than let them be torn apart out there. He remembered his father's voice, a memory from a long time ago after a storm had flattened their small garden. "It's not about what you lose, son," Samuel had said, his hands already clearing the debris. "It's about what you do with what's left." Billy wiped his eyes on his sleeve, the tears replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Mr. Crawford had left him with ruins. Fine, he would work the ruins. He stood up, his small shoulders squared against the darkness, and walked back to the mill, his mind no longer on survival, but on fighting back. With a resolve forged in the fire of humiliation and love, Billy's fight for survival transformed into a fight for dignity. He would not just exist in the ruins Mr. Crawford had thrown them into, he would build a home from them. His first task was monumental, clearing the years of debris, fallen timbers, and sharp stones that littered the inside of the mill. Each morning, before the Texas sun grew merciless, he was awake, his young body straining to move rocks a grown man would struggle with. Timmy watched him, his small face a mixture of awe and concern. "What are you doing, Billy?" he'd ask. Billy would pause, wipe the sweat from his brow with a dusty forearm and force a smile. "I'm making us a fortress, Timmy," he'd reply, his voice steady. "A place so strong, no one can ever make us leave." Each stone he moved was a defiance, each splinter he pulled from his hands a testament to his silent vow. The days bled into a rhythm of relentless, grueling labor. Billy's hands, which should have been turning the pages of a schoolbook, were now raw, blistered, and slowly hardening into the calloused tools of a seasoned laborer. He would work until his muscles screamed in protest, pausing only to check on Gracie, who he kept nearby in a small shaded pen he'd constructed from old planks. He'd mash their meager food, ensuring his siblings ate first, his own hunger a dull, constant companion he learned to ignore. Timmy, desperate to help, became his little assistant, hauling buckets of water that were half his own weight and gathering dry brush for their nightly fire. He would stand guard over Gracie when Billy had to tackle a particularly difficult task, puffing out his small chest and reporting that everything was all clear, a small soldier in their three-person army against the world. The world outside their small circle of effort was not kind. Mr. Crawford's foreman would occasionally ride by, a cruel smirk on his face as he watched the orphan boy playing pioneer. He'd shout taunts, his words carried on the wind. "Still here, runt? I bet you'll be begging the sheriff to take those brats off your hands by winter." Other ranch hands, too fearful to offer help, would whisper among themselves that the Sawyer boy had lost his mind, trying to build a future out of a pile of rot. Billy never looked up. He never acknowledged them. He simply gripped his makeshift shovel tighter, the derision of the men serving only as fuel. He would not give them the satisfaction of his despair. He would let his work be his only answer, a silent, stubborn rebellion against their low expectations and their cold, indifferent hearts. As he worked, clearing the dense, thorny overgrowth that choked the base of the massive rusted water wheel, he began to notice small oddities. One afternoon, while trying to dig out a stubborn root system near the wheel's axle, his shovel struck something with a dull, metallic clang that was different from the sound of hitting rock. He assumed it was just a buried part of the mill's foundation and moved on. A few days later, he observed that while the rest of the creek bed was cracked and bone-dry, the earth directly beneath the lowest point of the great wheel was strangely dark and damp, almost spongy to the touch. He was too consumed with the immediate tasks of survival, finding food, reinforcing their shelter, to give these strange details much thought. But they lodged in the back of his mind, small unanswered questions in the landscape of his daily struggle. There were moments when the weight of it all became nearly unbearable. One evening, after a day of fruitless foraging, with Gracie wailing from hunger and Timmy shivering from a sudden cold snap, Billy felt his resolve crumble. He sat outside the mill, hidden in the darkness so his siblings couldn't see his defeat, and the exhaustion hit him like a physical blow. He felt the sting of tears, the first he'd allowed himself since his mother's funeral. "Dad," he whispered to the uncaring stars, his voice breaking. "I don't know if I can do this. I'm so tired. I'm failing them." Just then, the patched-up door creaked open, and Timmy stood there, a silhouette against the firelight. He walked over and placed his small, cold hand on Billy's shoulder. "Don't be sad," he said softly. "You're taking care of us. Daddy would be so proud of you." That simple, unwavering faith from his 6-year-old brother was the spark that reignited his spirit. The next day, he attacked his work with renewed vigor. Weeks of tireless effort had transformed the dilapidated mill. It was no longer a ruin but a rustic fortified shelter. The roof was patched, the floor was cleared, and a sturdy door kept the night at bay. Having secured their living space, his attention now turned to the giant water wheel, the rusted, silent monument to their abandonment. He decided it had to be moved, or at least cleared of the debris that held it fast. Using a long iron bar as a lever, he began to pry at a thick, corroded metal plate near the axle, the same spot where his shovel had clanged strangely. With a grunt of exertion, he put his entire weight into the bar. The old metal groaned, but then he heard something else, a distinct, hollow echo from within the wheel itself. The hollow echo was a question he had to answer. With a surge of adrenaline, Billy wedged the iron bar deeper and threw his entire weight against it. Metal shrieked in protest, a sound that ripped through the quiet afternoon, and the corroded plate finally gave way, revealing a dark, cramped cavity within the massive axle of the water wheel. His heart hammered against his ribs. He peered into the gloom, seeing only thick cobwebs and the dust of ages. Reaching a trembling hand into the darkness, his fingers brushed against something that was not cold metal or splintered wood, but smooth and leathery. He gripped it and pulled. Out came an old, oilskin-wrapped bundle, surprisingly heavy for its size. Timmy, who had been watching with wide eyes, crept closer, his voice a hushed whisper. "What is it, Billy? Is it treasure?" Billy couldn't answer, his mind racing. It was a deliberately hidden thing, a secret waiting in the heart of their ruin. With hands that shook with a mixture of fear and anticipation, Billy carefully unwrapped the oilskin. The material, though ancient, had protected its contents perfectly from the elements. Inside he found a stack of brittle yellow documents, bound with a faded ribbon. They were covered in an elegant, looping script he could barely decipher, each page stamped with elaborate seals of dark red wax. He couldn't grasp the complex legal language, but certain words leaped out at him. Land grant, deed of title, and most incredibly, the name Sawyer, penned in a confident, flowing hand. Beneath the papers lay a small, heavy leather pouch. He fumbled with the drawstring, and a cascade of dull, heavy coins spilled into his palm. They were old and thick, bearing unfamiliar crests. This wasn't junk. This was a legacy, a history his family never knew they had, hidden away by an ancestor and left for them to find. The magnitude of the discovery crashed over him, a tidal wave of emotion that shattered the dam he had built around his heart. This was more than money. It was justice. It was a lifeline thrown from the past. For the first time since his mother was buried, Billy let himself break. A raw, ragged sob tore from his throat, and the tears he had swallowed for weeks finally streamed down his face, carving clean paths through the grime of his ordeal. He didn't try to hide them. He sat on the dusty ground, clutching the papers, and wept for his parents, for his lost childhood, for the sheer impossible relief of this moment. Timmy, seeing his brother's tears, wrapped his small arms around his neck. "It's okay, Billy," he whispered, feeling the shift. Looking up at the sky through blurry eyes, Billy laughed a choked, broken laugh. "Yeah, Timmy," he managed to say. "Daddy would be so proud." Once the emotional storm subsided, the sharp, protective instincts of a parent took over once more. He understood immediately that this discovery was as dangerous as it was miraculous. He held something of immense value, but he was just a boy, and he had no idea what it was truly worth or how to claim it. His thoughts turned to Miss Thompson, the retired schoolteacher who had always shown his family kindness. She was wise, respected, and most importantly, she was honest. He knew she was the only person he could trust. Carefully he rewrapped the precious bundle and hid it deep within a crevice in the mill's stone wall. He then knelt down to face Timmy, his expression deadly serious. "Listen to me. This is our biggest secret. You cannot tell anyone what we found. Not a single person. Promise me." Timmy, sensing the urgency, nodded solemnly. The fear of starvation had been replaced by a new, colder fear, the terror of losing it all to Mr. Crawford's greed. That night, long after his siblings had drifted into a peaceful sleep, Billy sat by the dying embers of their fire, a single old coin resting in his palm. The discovery hadn't solved their immediate problems. Their bellies were still empty, and the mill was still cold, but it had ignited a fierce, unquenchable hope within him. This was the proof that his family wasn't worthless, that their roots in this land ran deeper and truer than Mr. Crawford's ever could. He looked at Timmy's sleeping face and Gracie's tiny form, a perfect picture of innocence. The weight of his responsibility felt different now. It was no longer a crushing burden of despair, but a focused mission, a sacred trust. He made a silent vow to them, a promise that he would be smart, that he would be patient, and that he would use this secret to build the safe, united future his parents had always dreamed of for them. The journey to justice began when Miss Thompson, her eyes alight with a historian's passion, confirmed the document's significance. They were an original Spanish land grant, predating the state of Texas itself, bestowing ownership of not just the mill, but hundreds of acres of surrounding land. Land Mr. Crawford believed was his. With the help of the retired lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, the Sawyer family's claim was filed. News traveled like wildfire through the small community. One morning, a cloud of dust announced the furious arrival of Mr. Crawford. He stormed onto the property, his face purple with rage, but the dynamic had irrevocably shifted. He was no longer the master on his porch, but a trespasser on Billy Sawyer's land. He found the boy not cowering in a ruin, but standing calmly before a home he was actively rebuilding. A silent testament to a will the rancher had fatally underestimated. He was here to threaten, to bully, to take back what he thought was his. "This is a mistake, a clerical error," Mr. Crawford bellowed, his voice accustomed to instant obedience. "This land has belonged to my family for 100 years. You forged those papers, you little thief." Billy, with Mr. Jenkins standing quietly beside him, did not flinch. He let the man's rage wash over him, a storm that no longer had the power to frighten him. "You gave me the deed to this mill yourself, Mr. Crawford," Billy said, his voice low, but carrying with unshakable certainty. "You told me it was all the family of a drowned field hand deserved. You said if I bothered you again, you'd have Timmy sent to El Paso and Gracie to Amarillo. Do you remember saying that?" The rancher's face went pale as Billy recited his own cruel words, the public humiliation now turned back on its architect. Timmy, watching from the doorway, held his head high, seeing his brother finally face down their monster. Mr. Jenkins stepped forward, holding a sheaf of legal papers. "The Sawyer grant is ironclad, Crawford," the lawyer stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Furthermore, the deed you signed over to this boy, in front of witnesses I might add, legally transferred this parcel to him. Any attempt to intimidate him or his family will result in immediate legal action." Mr. Crawford looked around wildly, seeking an ally, but found only the cold, judgmental eyes of the very ranch hands he had once commanded. They had come to watch the showdown, their fear of the boss finally eclipsed by their respect for the boy who had refused to break. Defeated, his power evaporating under the Texas sun, Mr. Crawford stumbled back to his truck, shouting empty threats of ruinous lawsuits. He drove away not in a cloud of dust and authority, but in a shroud of public disgrace, leaving the Sawyer family standing united on the land that was finally, truly theirs. The following years were a testament to the Sawyer spirit. The court affirmed their ownership, and with the sale of a small portion of the vast lands, Billy had the capital to transform their lives. The old mill was lovingly restored, not as a home, but as a historical landmark and a museum dedicated to the area's forgotten workers. Beside it, they built a modest but sturdy house, filled with warmth, laughter, and the smell of good food. Timmy and Gracie thrived, excelling in school, their childhoods reclaimed from the brink of disaster. Billy, while overseeing their growing agricultural business, made sure to finish his own education. He named their new enterprise the Sawyer's Hope Ranch, a tribute to his mother, and established the Samuel Sawyer Education Fund, a scholarship ensuring that the children of other ranch hands would have the opportunities his father had only dreamed of providing for him. Mr. Crawford's downfall was as swift as the Sawyers' ascent. His reputation was destroyed and emboldened by Billy's victory. Other families began to come forward with their own stories of his negligence and abuse. Burying him in lawsuits he could no longer afford. His arrogance had left him with no allies, and one by one his assets were seized, his empire of cruelty crumbling into dust. 11 years after he had tried to destroy the Sawyer children, a stooped, broken old man appeared at the gate of Sawyer's Hope Ranch. It was Mr. Crawford, his expensive boots replaced with worn-out shoes, his face a roadmap of failure. He had come to beg for a job, any job, from the very filthy runt he had cast out into the ruins. The power dynamic had come full circle, placing the fate of the tyrant in the hands of the boy he had wronged so grievously. Billy, now a confident young man of 25, looked at the pathetic figure before him. He saw Timmy, a teenager, and Gracie, a bright young girl, watching from the porch of their home. Every instinct screamed for retribution. He remembered the cold nights, the gnawing hunger, and the terrifying threat of being torn from his siblings. He could have sent Crawford away with a cruel word, a mirror of the treatment he had received. But then he looked at his siblings and remembered his father's lesson. A man's worth isn't what he has, but what he is. He would not let Crawford's poison corrupt his soul. "We have a position mending fences," Billy said, his voice even. "The pay is fair and the work is honest." Crawford looked up, stunned. "Why?" he rasped. "After everything?" Billy simply replied, "Because my father taught me about dignity, and my siblings are watching me now. The cycle of cruelty ends here." If you believe in the power of justice, in the unbreakable strength of family, and in the profound truth that our character is defined by the choices we make in our darkest hours, we invite you to become part of our community. These stories are for everyone who believes that even after the most devastating storms, hope can be rebuilt, stronger than before. Please subscribe to our channel, activate the notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter, and share this story with someone you know who might be facing their own struggles. Your support helps us continue to bring narratives of resilience and redemption to the world. Join us next time for another powerful story that proves the human spirit can overcome any obstacle, and that true wealth is not what we own, but who we choose to be.